Welcome to This Week in Christian History, a podcast from the Center for Christian History at Mississippi College. The Center for Christian History is dedicated to expanding knowledge and understanding of Christian history. Our mission is to provide a scholarly, unbiased look at the events, figures, and movements that have shaped Christianity over the centuries. You can visit centerforchristianhistory.com for daily historical highlights. And each week on this podcast, we'll do a deep dive into key moments with Christian history's leading authorities. We are pleased to have the Christian History Institute sponsor this episode of the podcast. Find free resources and subscribe to their magazine at christianhistoryinstitute.org. Our first historical highlight of the week and the subject of our deep dive is the Edict against the Christians. For several hundred years, Roman emperors mostly ignored the presence of Christians. Though most emperors viewed themselves as gods and were not keen on Christians worshiping someone else, most allowed the Christians to live out their faith. However, on February 24th, 303 AD, Emperor Diocletian issued the Edict against the Christians, which inflicted serious pain on the churches throughout the Roman Empire. The edict remained in effect until Constantine became emperor and ended the persecution of Christians. And on February 26, 398, John Chrysostom became Archbishop of Constantinople. Chrysostom was one of the ancient church fathers who wrote and preached during a critical time in the history of the church. His last name is the anglicized version of the Greek word for golden-mouthed because of his well-known oratory skills. He was exiled several times for fighting against Christian heresies. Finally, on February 28, 1638, several nobles joined clergy members at Greyfriars Kirk in Edinburgh to make the Scottish National Covenant. The covenant arose from the idea that Christ was the head of the church, not the king or queen, and many of the signers were martyred for signing it. Today in our deep dive, Nick Walters, director of the Center for Christian History, talks with Michael Haykin of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary about Diocletian's edict against the Christians.
We're really glad to have Dr. Michael Haykin, who is a professor of church history at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kentucky, to join us and talk more about this particular edict and its impact and what that actually meant to the early church and to Christianity as a whole. So, Dr. Haykin, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So tell us, was the edict actually called the Edict Against the Christians, or did it become known as that?
Yeah, it becomes known as that. I'm not sure we actually would know the exact title of the edict as it went out, but that's the way it becomes known.
I got you. And so sometimes truth is better than fiction, right? So it's it's a lot easier just to be say, well, this is what it was, okay, even whether that was intended. So give us a little background on that. Diocletian, is he co-emperor of the Roman Empire at this time, or is he the sole emperor of the?
Yeah, he's a co-emperor, and so the Diocletian comes at the close of the third century, which really was an age of chaos. You have the second century, which is the kind of the showpiece of Pax Romana, the Roman peace, when you have between 96 AD with the accession of Nerva and the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180, you have 5 emperors, and all of them remarkable men, administrators, military leaders, and they're able to build the empire really a solid basis in many, many ways. And then the third century dawns, when a lot of the gains that the empire had made in terms of its infrastructure start to fall apart. And between roughly the 220s and Diocletian's accession in 284, you have somewhere around 35 to 40 emperors in the space of about 65 years. And the average reign of these emperors is about a year and a half. And of those numbers, only 2 of them die in their beds. The rest of them are either assassinated or killed on the battlefield, usually in civil wars. And it was really the big question is, why didn't the Roman Empire at that point in time fall? And the answer, in many respects, is Diocletian, who was a junior army officer who worked his way up through the ranks and in 284 marched on Rome, met the previous emperor, and invited him to a parley. Um, and the previous emperor was unguarded in when he met Diocletian. Next thing he knew, his head was being lopped off of his shoulders by
Heck of a
Diocletian's
party.
sword. And his legions basically, oh, yeah, he's dead. We're not going to fight for him. And so Diocletian becomes the emperor. Um, if you'd been living at the time, you'd have thought, well, he's just, one of a long line. He'll be here. He'll be here today, gone tomorrow. But as it turned out, he ruled till 305 AD, really 21 years, which was enormously long, given what had been taking place in the 3rd century. And he realized he needed to initiate a variety of reforms. And so there's military reform. One of the problems the empire had up until the 3rd century, the old style Roman army based around the Roman legionary foot soldier had been the kind of standard element of the army, and he needed to revise army tactics and introduce the importance of the cavalry. Cavalry had always been kind of peripheral to the Roman army in terms of strategy and tactics. He builds a line of forts along the Rhine River, where various Germanic barbarians had been penetrating into the empire. So there's military reform. There's economic reform. The coinage was increasingly debased in the 3rd century, and he rebuilds the economy on the basis of a solid gold coin called a solidus, which would be treasured for the next 400 or 500 years. Archaeologists have found hordes of these as far afield as what is now Scandinavia and Sri Lanka, amazingly.
Wow.
And then he initiates political reform. The empire had become far too unwieldy to govern, and so he appoints in the West a co-emperor, both of them being called Augustus. Augustus is a title at this point, and the co-emperor was a key. Now I'm a Canadian, so I'm going to say lieutenant, and a key lieutenant of his named Maximian, who was fervently loyal to Diocletian. And the problem in the 3rd century had been the issue of succession. In the 2nd century, with the kind of reign of these 5 emperors who are remarkably good emperors from the point of view of the empire, they would adopt their heir. So Nerva adopted Trajan, Trajan adopted Hadrian, Hadrian adopted Antoninus Pius, Antoninus Pius adopted Marcus Aurelius. But in the 3rd century, this procedure had completely fallen apart, and power was being seized by whoever had the most soldiers or legions backing him, etc. And so Diocletian comes up with this model whereby there would be a co-emperor in the West. He was the emperor in the East, and they're called Augustus. And then each of them had a man under them who, at a certain point, Diocletian and Maximian would abdicate, which he did do in 305, 2 years into the persecution. And the men below them, who are called Caesars, would succeed them. The Caesar in the east under him was Galerius. In the west, it's Constantius Chlorus, or Constantius Paleface, who is the father of Constantine. And so the idea was that this would provide a peaceful transfer of power. The division of emperors, the division of the empire into an east and west, probably ran along linguistic lines, the west being the lingua franca is Latin, in the east it's Greek. And it would actually presage the division that would happen after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Greek-speaking East would continue to exist as the imperial power down into the 1400s as the Byzantine Empire. So this was a way of governing a very large landmass, 70 million to 80 million people under their rule, and also provide a peaceful transfer of power. So he had done various reforms, political, economic, military, and the final one that he is not persuaded of initially is religious reform. And there had been calls for heavy persecution of the church for a while. A a Greco-Roman philosopher named Porphyry had been calling for the destruction of the church, that it was an affront to the gods, and that the third century, the chaos of the third century, was because of the presence of these Christians.
Oh.
And there is very clear evidence, at least from the point of view of Christian authors like Eusebius of Caesarea, who writes a famous church history, Lactantius. These men would basically identify the Caesar in the east, Galerius, as the instigator of the persecution. Somewhere in his past, and it probably is linked to, Eusebius links it to his mother, there is a deep-seated hatred of Christianity.
Huh.
And when they initially suggest to Diocletian that he initiate this savage persecution that would be empire-wide, he's reluctant to engage in it. Diocletian is a wily politician. He's managed to stay in power for close to, at this point, 18 years, fend off any potential rivals, and he probably would have been aware that Christianity at this point had grown to about 10% of the empire. There were towns in Egypt, Asia Minor, where 70 to 80% of the town was a professing Christian population. And he would have known that plunging the empire into a war against the church was going to cause significant bloodshed. And it would be significantly problematic on a number of levels, financial, political, etc. But finally, he is persuaded to launch a persecution in 303 with an initial edict that was to destroy any buildings that had been identified as church buildings. Key leaders of the church, bishops, elders, were to be arrested and compelled to sacrifice to the Roman gods. If not, they'd be executed. And then the scriptures were to be handed over to the state authorities. This had been a part of the policy of the Romans for a while. In the early days, when scriptures were demanded, Christians could get away with handing over the sermons of their pastor. The Romans were none the wiser. But after, close to 200 years of persecution, the Romans had some idea as to what the scriptures were. And so you couldn't get away with that anymore. And so those are the three initial elements of the first edict. And then there would be a later general edict that compelled everyone in the empire to sacrifice and to have proof that you had sacrificed to the gods. We actually have, I think it's about 4 or 5 of what's called a libellus, Libellus, which is a document that would indicate from usually a priest in a temple, whoever, saw so-and-so sacrificing to the god whoever on such and such a date. And you would need to carry this with you in case you were stopped by authorities to indicate that you had indeed sacrificed to the gods.
Well, it's just like having to show your papers in the Nazi regime or something like that, right? If somebody hey, aren't you one of those Christians? Hey, no, I used to be, but here's my paperwork. I'm not anymore. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
You can watch the rest of Nick's interview with Michael Haykin on the Center for Christian History website at centerforchristianhistory.com. We are pleased to have the Christian History Institute sponsor this episode of the podcast. Find free resources and subscribe to their magazine at christianhistoryinstitute.org. This Week in Christian History is produced for the Center for Christian